In today's session, we're going to look at time series databases. Specifically, we're going to look at InfluxDB. And before we talk about the database, I want to spend some time on understanding what time series data is and why we cannot use existing relational databases for time series data, and what benefits do we get by using a specific time series database. And then we're going to dive deeper into the code and how to install and all that stuff. Let's get started. Alright, first let's understand what time series data is. So any data that is collected at different points in time represents a time series data. If you were to plot this data on a graph, then one of the axes is always going to be time. You'll find time series data across many domains. For example, if you want to log server metrics as in CPU usage or memory usage every second or every minute, that constitutes as a time series data. You can also capture sensor information or application logs, for example, user login information, or if you have incident management system, you might have high priority incidents, low priority incidents, you have incident open time, close time, and all that. So that also corresponds to time series data. Even in the financial space, if you want to track the price of a stock or security at at different points in time, just like how we have candlestick data, that also represents a time series information. And even in the healthcare sector, if you want to track patient health information over a period of time, that also corresponds to time series data. So you'll find time series information across multiple domains. So as we progress in this video, you'll understand the benefits of using a dedicated time series database. Time series data is also known as time stamped data. So one thing to keep in mind here is that we need to collect the data against a timestamp and not time duration. I want to illustrate that point using these two examples. So this is some fictitious user login data, and on the left hand side we are capturing the login duration of each user in an application. And even though it represents some element of time, this does not correspond to a time series data because it has to be captured against a timestamp. And on the right hand side you have the exact login timestamp of each user, which does represent time series data. So keep in mind, we are the data needs to be captured against a timestamp and not duration or anything else. One of the most common use case with the time series data is that we want to aggregate the data we captured at different timestamps into time intervals to create actionable insights. To be able to achieve that, we need to perform transformation and aggregation at a database level. So let's understand what these two operations are. If you are familiar with map function in JavaScript, represents a transformation. For example, if you have an array and if we apply the transformation of multiply by 2, then we take each element of this array and multiply by 2 and we get this new array. So that's what a transformation is. We take each element and we transform it into something else. If you are familiar with reduce function in JavaScript, that represents aggregation. So here is a quick example. We have an array and we apply a reduce function of sum of all elements, and when we do that we get the sum of all elements. So we take an array and condense it into a value using a reduce function. So being able to aggregate and transform at a query level will make your life so much easier when it comes to time series data. Here is a quick comparison between a relational database and a time series database. So when it comes to relational database, you can have any number of primary or secondary keys, whereas with a time series database, timestamp is always the key. And these design choices are made to make a time series database work extremely efficient with time series data. Next, a relational database supports all the CRUD operations: create, read, update, and delete. Whereas with a time series database, create and read are prioritized over update and delete. And again, this again goes well with the philosophy of time series data. So generally, you might want with the time series data, you want to perform bulk updates and read data across large time frames. Like you want the capability to read millions of records. So that is the reason create and read are prioritized over update and delete. Next, we have stored procedures on relational database, and with time series, you don't have stored procedures, but you have retention policies. So let's say you're capturing some data and you only want to retain a history of up to month for a particular data. Then you can define a retention policy and the database will automatically scrub any data that's older than a month. You also have continuous query support. Next, we use SQL to interact with a relational database, whereas with time series database we have influx and influxql. Influx is more at a scripting level, and I'm not really familiar with Influx. I didn't really spend much time on it, but most of in this video we're going to be covering InfluxQL, which is somewhat similar to SQL, but it doesn't have all the capabilities. For example, we don't have union, join, or having. But again, this is again optimized for a time series data, so you wouldn't miss out on these features. Second, with a SQL database, you have to have a predefined schema, and you can only store the data which fits that schema. Whereas with time series database, you don't have to define a schema. You can change the columns on the go, and it's very flexible in that regard. Next, we cannot perform aggregation and transformation at a database level. We can, but it's very limited, and it's also not efficient. But whereas time series, we can perform these two at a database level. Memory usage and efficiency, this is again a byproduct of being able to aggregate and transform at the database level. So let's say you have, let's take an example. Let's say you have the user login information over the last 1 month, and you want to identify the number of logins every day. And you can have millions of rows over the last 1 month, right? And generally, if you were to do this calculation on a relational database, you would first read all the million rows and then transform and aggregate to create the number of logins each day. And when you do it at a code level, then when you download all those millions of rows into the code, that into your app, that creates a memory spike. So it's not really ideal. Again, you can get over this issue by using streams and only reading one record at a time. But if you do that, you would miss out on the performance because it would take a long time for that query to run. You with time series database, you don't have to worry about any of this. You can perform these at a query level, so it's memory efficient and fast. Now it's time to get familiar with few terms in TSDB. First, we have measurement, which is similar to a table in a relational database. So when we write a SQL query, then we select few columns from a table, and in this case we select from a measurement. We have two different kinds of columns in time series database. One is indexed columns and the other one is non-indexed columns. So indexed columns are called labels and non-indexed columns are called fields. Now, while deciding the data structure, you might be wondering, how do I know which one should I set as an indexed column and which one I should leave it as non-indexed column? I'm going to just refer to them as labels and fields going forward. So how do we know which one should be a label and which one should be a field? So the thumb rule that I follow is any column that is going to go into the where clause. So depending on the data that I'm storing, I might have in mind the kind of queries that I'm going to run on this table, correct? On this measurement. So the columns that are going to go into the where clause, I'm going to set them as labels. And the columns that are going to pass into the aggregation function, I'm going to set them as fields. You can also query that measurement on fields, but because fields are not indexed, those queries are going to perform very, very slow. So it's important that you understand the labels and fields correctly and set them appropriately to get the maximum performance out of your database. Again, you have to play around with the database for a while to understand how these settings work, but I'll try to cover these during the demo session. Then we have duration, which is used to aggregate data that we collected across timestamps into time intervals. So InfluxDB supports quite a few time intervals and you can find all the list over here. I'm going to be installing InfluxDB on a cloud server to give you an accurate picture on performance, latency, and make it more real world, true to real world usage. I'm going to be using this cheat sheet for all the commands that I need to install the database. I'm using Ubuntu 20.04 version, and you can verify that by using the command lsb_release/a. You can see that I'm running Ubuntu 20.04 version. First, we need to add the InfluxDB repo. You can do that by using this command. Next, we need to download the GPG keys to verify the build. Then we need to run apt-get update. And then we need to run apt-get install. That's it. Installation is finished. In order to start the database, you need to run the command sudo. You need to run a couple of commands. First, we need to run systemctl start influxdb and then systemctl enable influxdb. That's it. InfluxDB has started. You can verify that by using the command systemctl status InfluxDB. You can see that it's active and running. Now when you run the command influx, you can see that it installed an older version of the database, which is 1.8.4. The latest version is 2.0, but I believe that the latest version is not added to the repo, to the apt-get repo, but when it is, you will be able to download and install the latest version. That being said, this is not going to stop us from exploring the time series database. Even the older version has all the features that are needed and that we discussed earlier in this tutorial. There are two ways to interact with the database. First is by calling the InfluxDB APIs using a curl command or by using influxql. So first I'm going to show you how to create a database using a curl command. So we're going to use this command to create a database called MonaLisaDB. So just to be clear, this is the data hierarchy in an InfluxDB. So at the top level we have the database, and inside the database we have measurements, and measurements have fields and tags. So let's create the database. That's it, it's successful. Now we can verify that the database is created using influx query. So you can log into the influx client using influx command. That's it. After we open the influx client, we need to specify which database to use. So you can say use MonaLisaDB. Now in order to get the list of databases, you run the query show databases. You can see that MonaLisa database exists. To get the list of users, we use the command show users. Right now we don't have any users, that's why it's empty, but when we create users, we will see the list here. And similarly, to get all the measurements, we can say show measurements. Again, we don't have anything, so it doesn't show anything here. To exit the client, we can say exit. Now let's see how to secure the database by enabling authentication. To do that, first we need to enable the authentication in the database configuration. So to do that, I'm going to use Vim editor to edit the config. So let's open the config file, and under HTTP, let's go to HTTP. Yes, here, and we need to enable this authentication. After enabling authentication, you need to restart the database using the command sudo systemctl restart influxdb. After restarting the database, we need to create a user with all the privileges which we have to pass whenever we run a query or interact using an API. So let's create the user using this command. I'm going to create a user called Prometheus with the password facehugger. So let's run this command and hit enter. Yes, it's successful and the user is created. Now we can verify that this user exists using the query show users. Let's try to do it. So let's log into influx client, and then say use MonaLisaDB. When we run this query, we get an error that unable to parse authentication credentials. That means we have not logged in, and we need to specify the credentials when we log into the influx client. So we can do that using this command. So note that, because we enabled authentication and secured it with a user, going forward we have to specify the credentials whenever we log in into influx client or when we call the APIs. So let's do this. Okay, now let's say use MonaLisaDB, and now let's try to see the list of users. So show users. See, now we can see the users, Prometheus, and it's admin because it has all the privileges. So because we specified the credentials and then logged into the client, we're able to do it. Otherwise, it's going to stop us. Similarly, whenever we call the API, we have to specify the credentials. So here we have an API to create a new user called Naruto with the password QB123, whatever, and We have to specify the credentials using the command /u and username :password. So let's run this command. This is going to create a new user. Hit enter. You can see the result is successful. Again, to verify the users, go to Influx and okay, let me exit out of it. Let's log in with the password. Use Mona Lisa DB and show users. You can see that 2 users exist now, the second one that we just created. So that's about installation and how to secure the database. Now you might have noticed that when we run the commands, we run it against 8086 port. So if we were to call this, if we want to access the database from an external application, we need to make this 8086 port open on this cloud server. Otherwise, the external applications won't be able to interact with it. So you can, if you are running this on an AWS server, you can add a security policy to do it. Or if you're using any other cloud provider, you have to just open the port, just find the steps to open this 8086 port and you should be fine. Earlier I mentioned about the data hierarchy on a time series database. So at the top level we have a database, next we have measurements, and beneath that we have tags and field values. Now a measurement is synonymous to a table in a relational database, but if you have some experience working with relational databases, you might have noticed that first you have to create a schema and for a table, and only then you can start populating the data. But that is not the case with time series database. Because this is a schema-less database, you can start writing the data right away without having to create any predefined schemas. So that's the beauty of using a TSDB. So we're going to work on a project where we're going to store user login information and run some time series related operations on the data. So because we don't have to create any predefined schema, we can start writing the data right away. So I'm going to show you in that project. Now let's start with the first project. In this project, we're going to store user login information across a span of 1 month, and we're going to create some fictitious data. And as part of the first step, we're going to store the data in the database. And once we store the database, we're going to see how we can run the queries using InfluxQL. Now I'm going to be running this application on my local laptop, and I'm going to be connecting it to the server where we hosted the database earlier. And make sure to open 8086 port on the server, otherwise you would run into timeout issues. Alternatively, you could also route all the HTTPS traffic to 8086 port if you don't want to open the port on your server. So I'm going to need a couple of packages to write the application. The first one is Node Influx, which is a Node.js client to connect to the InfluxDB. And I'm also going to need .env because in order to connect to the database, I need to pass the host name, user ID and password. I can hard code those values in the code, but that's not the right way to do it. So I'm going to create an environment variable and pass the credentials through the environment variable. This is a safer way to do it because generally when we commit the code on GitHub, we exclude env files, thereby not disclosing any sensitive data that our app needs to run. Alright, first I'm going to initialize the package using npm init -y. Then I'm going to install both the packages. Then I created a file called helper.js, which has a bunch of random usernames that I'm going to use to store the data. Then I'm going to create a file called p1data.js, which is where we're going to write the logic to store the data on the server. I've created an environment variable with the username, password, and the host. We're going to use these variables in our code to pass the credentials and the host. So first I'm going to use .env to load all the environment variables. I forgot to mention that I also need Lodash module to randomly get a timestamp. So let me install that. First, I'm going to initialize the Influx client and Lodash modules. Then I'm going to create a client with all the details of the server, the database, and the user ID and password. And we're going to use this client to make the calls and pass the data. I'm going to need some metadata to write the logic. So first I'm going to import all the users from the helper module. Then I'm going to create a function called random user, which randomly returns a user from this list. And next I'm going to have a variable called rcount, which is the number of rows that I want to store on the database. So I've set it to 10,000. So I found 10,000 to be the right balance in terms of efficiency and practicality. And then I'm going to create a variable called start timestamp and end timestamp, which is the time window within which we are going to store all the login details. Then I've created a function called load data, which is an asynchronous function. And here you can see I've created all the rows, and this is going to be the structure of each row. So we have the measurement, which is analogous to a table in a relational database. So I'm calling it login info, and then we can pass different tags to the record. So generally we can pass the host name, application name, and instance. So I just hard coded some values, and then we can pass the fields. So username is going to be the field on which we're going to aggregate the data. So I'm going to pass username as a random user using the function that we just created. And then I'm going to pick a random timestamp between the start TS and end TS and pass that as well. Once we create the rows, we can call the function write points from this influx client and then pass all the rows. And if it is successful, you should get a message that says data stored successfully. So let's run it and see if this works or not. Make sure that 8086 port is open on your server. Let's run it. Okay, you can see that the data is stored successfully. So let's go to the server and see if the records are visible over there. First, I'm going to log in into the influx client. And I'm going to use the Mona Lisa DB. So I'll say use Mona Lisa DB. Before we start writing the queries, I just want to quickly refer back to a slide that we saw earlier to understand the structure of a query. So it's going to look very similar to SQL, where you have select from a table and you can have a where clause and group by clause. So we select and we pass some kind of aggregation or transformation function, and we pass the field names to that function, and we take the data from a measurement instead of table. And if we want to narrow down the query, we use a where clause and specify the different labels, and we can group by a time period, be it 1 minute or 1 day, or all the different time periods. We could also use labels to group the data, but we cannot label by field names. So earlier we ran a query to write 10,000 rows on the server. So let's see if the data exists or not. Select star from login info, and I'm going to limit the query to 100 rows and see how the result is. We need to specify the database name. So you say use Mona Lisa DB and then run the same query. Alright, you can see the data in a tabular format. You have a timestamp, and timestamp is shown in nanoseconds. So that is the reason you see 3 extra zeros in the end. And you have instance, app, and host, the tags or labels that we passed in the data. And we also have the username field over here. So the data is shown in a tabular format. Just to know that we have written 10,000 rows, you can run this query to verify that. So select count. Count is an aggregate function of star from login info, and if you run it, you can see a count of 10,000. So all the data is stored on the server. In order to see all the measurements in the database, you can say show measurements. See that we only have login info at this moment, so it only shows one measurement. Now let's write a query to group the data on a time period. So we have the data of each user logging in across a particular timestamp over a period of 1 month, right? So let's try to aggregate the data for each day and see how many logins are happening every day. So we'll do that by using this query. So here we are using the same count aggregate function from the measurement, from login info measurement, and we are restricting the query between these two timestamps, which corresponds the start timestamp and end timestamp in our data, and then we are grouping by 1 day. Now keep in mind that when you write these aggregate functions, you have to specify the from and to timestamps, otherwise the query would take forever. The reason you have to do that is because InfluxDB doesn't know by default the start and end timestamp of your measurement. So if you don't specify these two timestamps, then the query is going to run on from timestamp 0 to timestamp infinite. So it's going to take forever, right? So timestamp 0, I think it starts at around 1970, and imagine the query running for 30 years, so it's going to take a long time. So you have to specify the from and to timestamps to make the query run efficiently. So let's run it and see. You can see the aggregate for each day and the count of number of logins happening for each day. And you can see that the query ran pretty quickly, right? It didn't take a lot of time. So that's how you can use aggregate functions to group the data. If you want to group on, instead of one day, I want to group by, let's say, 6 hours, you can also do that, say 6h and hit enter, and it groups by 6 hours. If you want to do by 1 week, you can say 1 week, 1 W. Yeah. See, that's it. So that's the beauty of using a time series database. So you can group the data by time without having to do it at a code level. You can do this at a query level, which is what makes it so powerful. Now I want to do something interesting. So right now we only have 10,000 rows in the database. So I want to store 100,000 rows and then run the same queries and see how the performance looks like. Because generally, if you are dealing with 100,000 rows in your application, then these queries would take a long time to run if you were to use a relational database. So let's see if we are getting any performance advantage by using a time series database. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this code, run this P1 data loads 10 times so that I get up to 10,000 rows. And because we are using a random timestamp, the data should be unique. And I'm going to fast forward this step so that you don't have to wait for this step to happen. So I'll load the data and I'll be right back. I've run this app 10 times, so we should now have 100,000 rows on the server. So let's verify that. So select count of star from login info, and you can see we have up to 100,000 rows. Now let's try to run the same aggregate function where we want to identify the number of logins each day. And how long do you think this query would take to run? 2 seconds, 3 seconds? Let's see. That's right, it's instantaneous. It takes less than a second to process it, and it amazes me that you can run such an exhaustive query so quickly. So the performance is really mind-blowing. Now if you want to group by 1 week, you can again do the same thing. The performance, it's still instantaneous, it's blazingly fast. So you can clearly see the advantage of using time series database, right? The performance is really quite good compared to relational database. One other query that I wanted to run is to identify the login frequency for each user. And in order to run that query, I need to be able to group by username. But because we set username as a field and not as a tag or label, we won't be able to group using a field. So that's a disadvantage of using time series database. You cannot group by field names. Another thing that you can't do is to change the labels or tags after the data is written into a database. So the way it works is every time you write the data, it overwrites if there is any existing data. But you cannot specify a timestamp or change the labels or tags. Like you don't have update capability like we discussed earlier. So create and read are prioritized over update and delete. Now if you want to drop the table entirely, you can say drop measurement login info. The reason it runs so quickly is because it's not deleting the data from the disk. It's just deleting the index of the data from the memory. The reason I deleted this database is because I want to create a new set of data with username set as a field name as well as a tag, so that we can group by username to identify the login frequency of a particular user. So let's duplicate this file and create a new data load script. And here we'll include username as a tag as well as field. Okay, I've added a new tag called user dname or display name, and along with the field name that we already have. So let's load the data. All right, the data load is successful. Let's verify that on the server. Okay, we can see 10,000 rows, and let's sample some rows to see the data structure. Okay, you can see that we have an additional column called user display name, which is a tag, so we can group using the tag. In order to group by time as well as another tag, you have to use a comma to separate both the tags. So let's run query. And we are grouping by time as well as user display name, and hit enter. And you will see the results displayed for each user independently. And you can see for Shia, this is the distribution, the login frequency, and for Vanessa, this is the distribution. Now, if you want to filter out only on a particular user, you can pass the username in the where clause as well. So let's do that. Let's copy this query, and here we are filtering out the results for user Yong in the where clause. And we also discussed this point earlier, that labels and tags are indexed whereas fields are not indexed. Because we set user dname as a tag and we are passing it in the where clause, this should also help with the performance. And if we were to use a field name in the where clause, it's going to run very slowly. And because we added an additional tag, it's going to help with the performance. And hit enter, and you see the login distribution for the user Yong. One thing you might be wondering is if it's possible to run these queries from the Node.js application. And yes, you can do it. You can pass the same queries using a query function and retrieve the rows as we did with the Influx client on the server. So I've created this file called p1query.js, and I'm just going to run this small query which returns the top 10 rows from this login info measurement. And let's run that. As you can see, the results are displayed in a tabular format. So yeah, you can run any queries from the Node.js app as well. That's it for this first project. I just wanted to give a gentle introduction to time series database, how the queries look like, how we can aggregate the data. And I think in this small project, we were able to cover a lot of stuff. And I'm also able to show you the performance benefits you get by using a time series database. All right, now let's move on to the second project. So we're going to use the same folder where we did the first project and create new files for the second one. Let me first give you a brief overview of what the project is. As part of this project, we're going to download candlesticks data from Binance Exchange and aggregate them. So what we're going to do is we're going to download 1-minute candlesticks for a particular symbol and then store them in the time series database, and then we'll aggregate those candlesticks to create higher time frame candles. So we could aggregate into 1-day candles or 1-hour candles, or we can see how we can do that aggregation at a database level using this time series database. So we're going to do this in 2 steps like we did for project 1. So in the first step, we're going to work on the data loads, where we will download the 1-minute candlesticks from the Binance API and store them in the database. And in the second step, we're going to see how we can do the aggregation. Alright, first let's look at the data downloads. So I've created this new file called p2data.js, and we're going to use the same packages that we used in the first project. And along with those, I required an additional package called got, and this is needed to make the API calls to Binance Exchange to download the candlestick data. So as we did in the first project, I just initialized the modules and initialized the client, and then I'm going to use the same from and to timestamps. So we're going to download the candlesticks for the last 1 month, and you can see the timestamps here. And I'm going to need a function that takes this from and to timestamps and returns all the APIs that we have to process for a particular symbol. And the reason we need this is because if you're familiar with Binance APIs, I talked about this several times, we can only download 1,000 candlesticks at a time. So we have to make multiple requests in order to download 1-minute candlesticks for the past 1 month. So using this function, we get all the APIs that we need to process. And then I have a load data function where we can pass in the symbol for which we want to download the data. And as part of the first step, we're going to get all the requests that we need to process. And once we get the request, in the second step, we're going to download all the data and do some normalization to like each API returns an array, 2-dimensional array. So we flatten it out to create a 1-dimensional array. And then in the next step, we're going to convert the candlestick data into the time series database structure that we used in project 1. So I'm going to call this measurement as K-line data, and I'm going to use the tags exchange, which is Binance, and subtype is spot because I'm downloading spot candlesticks data, and the symbol for which we're going to store the data. And the fields are going to be the open, high, low, close, and volume metrics. The reason I set these as fields is because we're going to perform aggregation on these fields, on these values. So that is the reason I needed to set them as fields instead of tags. And we also get the timestamp, so we're going to pass the timestamp over this field. And once we transform the data, we would have to store them in the database. And I read the documentation. So this entire data comes around 43,000 rows. So if I were to just download all the data in one single chunk, it's going to error out. So I read the documentation. The best practice is to store data in chunks of 2000 records. So that's what I did here. So I'm sequentially processing each chunk of 2000 rows and then storing it in the database. And when everything is successful, then the data gets stored in the database. So here I have it set for ETH USDT symbol. So let me try to run the code and store the data. So let's say node p2 data.js. Alright, we got a message that the data stored successfully. So let's log into the server and see if the data exists or not. So here I am on the server. Let me log into the Influx client, and we can do that with this command. That's it. Now I need to use the database. Now we can get the list of measurements with the command. We can see we have K-line data. Now let's see how many rows are present. That's good. We can see that we have 43,911 rows. So data is stored successfully. Now that we successfully stored the data in the database, let's look at how to aggregate them into higher time frames. To understand how we are going to aggregate the data, we need to look at the inbuilt functions offered by InfluxDB. So this is a site where we have the list of functions that are inbuilt into InfluxDB. So in the first project, we use the count function to identify the login frequency. And in this project, in order to aggregate the candles into higher time frames, we need to use a different set of functions. So the first one, we need to identify the open, high, low, and close values, right? So to be able to do that, we can use the first function, which returns the first value of the open price. So we can use the first function to get to aggregate the open price, and we can use the max function to identify the peak of the candle, and the min function to identify the bottom of the candle, the lowest price of the candle, and we can use the last function to identify the closing price of the candle. So we're going to use these four functions to aggregate the candlesticks into higher time frames. So here I have the code where I've created a new file called p2query.js, and let me walk you through the code. So the first few steps are pretty straightforward, just loading the environment variables and initializing the required modules. And here I've created this aggregate keyline function, and we can pass the symbol that we want to aggregate the data for. And we downloaded the data for ETH USDT, right? So that's the symbol that I'm going to use to aggregate. And I want to aggregate the data into 1 day candlesticks. So we have downloaded 1 minute candlesticks, and I'm going to aggregate them into 1 day candlesticks. So that's what we specify here. And you can look at the code. It's pretty straightforward. I think it's under 10 or 20 lines of code, and that's the beauty of time series database. So we can do this at a query level, so the code complexity is significantly minimized. So let's see how we did it. So first, in order to identify the open price, so we use the first function to get the open price, and we aggregate the data we group the data on the 1 day time frame. That's it. So the way this works is, during the time window, it looks at the first value for the field that we pass. So we're going to pass open, so that's how we get the open price. And similarly, the last function is going to get the last value during the time period. And we're going to pass the close field name because we want the closing price for that candle. So that's how we get the closing price. And similarly, to get the high price, we need to know the highest price during the time interval. So we can do that by using the max function. And high field is where the highest price for each candle is captured. So that's how we get the high price. And similarly, for the low price, we use the min function, and we use the low because the low field is where the lowest price of each candle is captured. And once we get the result for all these four queries, we're going to combine them using this function and just print the data onto the console. So let's run this and see how the results are. And let's compare these results with the TradingView data to see if the data is matching with the TradingView data or not. Node All right, we got the data over here. Now let's compare it with TradingView. So I'll take this candle February 2nd and let's compare the open, high, low, close values with that of TradingView. If you hover over the candle, you'll see the candlestick values on the top left corner. So let me take a screenshot and then compare it with the values. So let's do it. Okay, for Feb 2nd, you can see the opening price is 1374.09, which is matching exactly, and the highest price is 1547.9, and the lowest price is 1360.28, and the closing price is 1511.18. Sorry, 1511.87. So you can see that the value is matching exactly with that of TradingView. So the aggregation that we did is very accurate, and the query also ran in just 1 or 2 seconds, so it's blazingly fast, and you can almost use it to aggregate candles real time, so you don't have to save these results in a database. You can do this real time whenever you want, and that's, I think, the beauty of using this database. So let me do one more example, and instead of 1 day candlesticks, I'll try to use maybe 4 hour candlesticks. Let's do 1 hour. Let's do 1 hour, and let's run it. All right, we got the results. Let's compare the values again. I'm going to take this another random candle. So let's take this one, 4:30 a.m. on 2nd of February. So let's change the time frame to 1 hour, and where is the candlestick? 4:30. This one, 4:30 a.m. to 4:30. 2nd February. 2nd February, 4:30 a.m. Yeah, this one. 4:30 a.m. Yeah, this one. Let's take a screenshot, and okay, let's see. The opening price is 1357.48, which is matching. The highest price is 1377.99, 1356.2, and 1374.17. So you can see that it's doing the aggregation very accurately, and it also runs pretty fast. So you can do this to aggregate candles real time. If you were to do this with a relational database like MySQL database, or a document database like MongoDB or Firestore, you would not get the same level of convenience or performance. I think it's fair to say that if you are dealing with time series data, I think using a dedicated time series database like InfluxDB is the right way to go if you want to get the best performance and ease of use in terms of aggregating or transforming the data. That's it for this video, and I know that this video is pretty long, but I try to provide as much information as possible in this video so that you can use it as a reference and refer to bits and pieces as and when you need them. And even though we did 2 projects, we spent so much time with this on this topic, I think we barely scratched the surface, and there is so much more to the database that we have to explore and know further. So I'm going to leave a couple of links in the description box where you can know more about the different functions and various other features that this InfluxDB offers. And trust me guys, so I think we barely scratched the surface. So there's so much more to it. So you can have continuous queries, and you can set data retention policies, and you can also have custom aggregation functions, and there's so much more stuff that even I did not get a chance to look into. That's it for this video. As always, leave your thoughts and suggestions in the comment section, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Bye.